Some towns are defined by their geography, others by their industry. But there are those few, those quiet, unassuming places on the map that are forever defined by a single moment in time. Clinton, Missouri, in the heartland of America, is one such place. To understand the story of what happened on a cool spring night in 1991, you first have to understand the town itself. Clinton was a place built on tradition, a community where front porches were still used and neighbors knew each other by name. The historic town square, with its proud late 19th century architecture, was the county's beating heart, a testament to a slower, more deliberate way of life. It was a town where the changing of the seasons was a communal event, where the first hint of spring thaw brought with it a sense of optimism and renewal. In the spring of 1991, that sense of hope was particularly palpable. The air was filled with the sweet, earthy smell of damp soil and blossoming dogwood trees. The days were getting longer, warmer, coaxing people out of their winter hibernation. For the young people of Clinton, it was a time of boundless possibility, a time for cruising down Main Street with the windows down, the radio playing a soundtrack to their unfolding lives. It was a town that felt safe, insulated from the kind of random, senseless violence that seemed to plague bigger cities. The greatest fears in Clinton were things like crop failures or a downturn in the local economy. The idea that a real monster, a predator, could be silently circling their streets was the furthest thing from anyone's mind. This was the world Angela Hammond knew, a world of comfort, familiarity, and the bright promise of a future she was eagerly building with the love of her life. If you want to hear more true crime stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Angela, or Angie as she was known to her friends and family, was the embodiment of that youthful small-town optimism. At 20 years old, she was vibrant and full of life, a young woman standing on the precipice of the future she had always dreamed of. Those who knew her paint a picture of a person who was both kind-hearted and fiercely loyal. She had a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that was infectious. In a town like Clinton, where everyone knew everyone, Angie was a familiar and welcome sight. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a cherished member of the community. But in the spring of 1991, she was preparing for her most exciting role yet, a wife and a mother. Angie was 4 months pregnant, a fact that had brought an incredible sense of joy and purpose to her and her fiancé, Rob Schaerer. They were a golden couple, their love story, a familiar and comforting narrative in their small town. They had plans, the kind of simple, heartfelt plans that are the bedrock of a happy life. A home, a family, a future filled with little league games and school plays, all unfolding under the wide Missouri sky. They were in the process of building their life together, piece by piece, their days filled with the mundane yet magical tasks of planning a wedding and preparing for a baby. The conversations they had were filled with dreams, big and small. What color to paint the nursery? Who would be in their wedding party? The kind of parents they hoped to be. Every decision, every conversation, was a brushstroke on the canvas of their shared future. On the evening of April 4th, 1991, none of that future seemed in doubt. It was a Thursday, an ordinary day that gave no hint of the darkness that was about to descend. The evening was spent in the comfortable rhythm of their life together, a barbecue with friends, the easy laughter and conversation that comes with deep and abiding affection. As the night wound down, there was no sense of foreboding, no premonition of the tragedy that was lurking just around the corner. It was just another night in a life that promised to be long and happy. As the evening deepened, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Clinton, Angie and Rob said their goodbyes to their friends. The air had grown cooler, a typical Missouri spring evening. Angie got into her car, a familiar and comfortable space, the scent of her perfume mingling with the faint aroma of the barbecue still clinging to their clothes. She drove Rob to his parents' home, a routine they had followed countless times. The short drive was filled with the easy chatter of a couple deeply in love, talk of their plans for the weekend, the continued excitement about the baby. There was a comfortable silence that only comes with true intimacy, the unspoken understanding that this was just a temporary parting. A brief pause until they would see each other again. When they arrived at his home, the farewell was tender, a simple "I love you," and a promise to call them later that night. It was a scene that played out between couples all over the world, a moment of mundane beauty that would soon be shattered into a million pieces. Angie watched as Rob walked to his front door, a familiar silhouette under the warm glow of the porch light. She then pulled away from the curb, her headlights cutting a path through the darkness, expecting to be home in a matter of minutes. But Angie had one last stop to make. In 1991, the landscape of communication was vastly different. There were no cell phones, no instant messages. The payphone was a vital link, a lifeline to the outside world. And on this night, Angie needed to use one. She drove to a small shopping area, a place she knew well, the familiar glow of the Food Barn grocery store, a beacon in the otherwise dimly lit lot. She parked her car and walked the few steps to the phone booth, a small, glass and metal enclosure that stood like a lonely sentinel in the quiet parking lot. The air was still, the only sounds the distant hum of a refrigerator unit from the grocery store, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the cool night air. She dropped her coins into the slot, the metallic clink echoing in the stillness, and dialed Rob's number. It was a call she had made countless times, a simple act of connection that would, on this night, become a desperate cry for help. The phone rang in the quiet of the Schaerer home, a familiar sound that Rob answered without a second thought, expecting to hear Angie's cheerful voice on the other end. And for a few moments, the conversation was just that, normal. They talked about their evening, the simple, everyday details that make up a life. But then, the tone of the conversation shifted. Angie's voice, usually so full of life and laughter, was now laced with a thread of unease. She told Rob about a truck, an older model pickup that was circling the parking lot. Her words painted a picture of a vehicle that was out of place, its slow, deliberate movements, a stark contrast to the quiet stillness of the night. She described it in detail, a two-tone green Ford with a distinctive and unusual mural of a fish on the back window. Her voice, though tinged with worry, was still calm, the voice of someone observing something strange, not yet realizing she was in the midst of a nightmare. Rob, on his end of the line, tried to be a calming presence, his words a balm against her rising anxiety. He listened as she described the truck pulling into the parking space next to her car, the sound of a car door opening and closing, a muffled noise over the phone line, was the first real indication that this was something more than just a strange coincidence. Angie's voice grew more strained as she described the man who got out of the truck. He was filthy, she said, with a beard and glasses, a description that would be seared into Rob's memory forever. He was wearing coveralls and carrying a flashlight, its beam cutting erratically through the darkness of the parking lot. The man's movements were unsettling, his presence an intrusion into the safe, predictable world they had always known. The conversation was no longer about their day or their future. It was a real-time narration of a growing threat. The terror that had been slowly building in Angie's voice suddenly erupted. A scream, sharp and piercing, tore through the phone line, a sound of pure, unadulterated fear that would haunt Rob for the rest of his life. It was a sound that signaled the brutal intrusion of violence into their peaceful world, the moment the nightmare became real. The line then went dead, the sudden silence somehow more terrifying than the scream that had preceded it. In that moment, the world shifted on its axis for Rob Schaerer. The comfortable familiarity of his home was gone, replaced by a cold, numbing dread. He was no longer a young man in love, but a man propelled by a primal need to get to the woman he loved. He didn't remember grabbing his keys or running out the door. His world had narrowed to a single desperate thought: Angie. He jumped into his own truck, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the ignition. The engine roared to life, a stark contrast to the deafening silence that was still ringing in his ears. He peeled out of his driveway, his tires screeching in protest, the sound of physical manifestation of his own internal agony. The 7-block drive to the food barn parking lot felt like an eternity. Every red light, every stop sign was an unbearable obstacle, a thief of precious seconds. His mind was a chaotic storm of fear and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not in Clinton, not to Angie. He raced through the deserted streets, the familiar landscape of his hometown, now alien and menacing. The soft glow of the streetlights seemed to mock him, their gentle illumination a stark contrast to the darkness that was now consuming his world. He was driving into the heart of a nightmare, a frantic, desperate race against a nameless, faceless evil. As Rob's truck thundered through the sleeping streets of Clinton, his mind was a maelstrom of terror and desperate hope. He prayed that he had misunderstood, that the line had simply dropped, that he would find Angie standing by the payphone, annoyed and confused, but safe. But as he neared the shopping center, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing steadily brighter, coming towards him. It was a truck, moving fast, too fast for the quiet residential street. As it grew closer, a chilling wave of recognition washed over him. It was a 2-tone green pickup, an older model, just as she had described. The two vehicles were on a collision course, 2 points of light hurtling towards each other in the vast darkness. In the split second that they passed, time seemed to slow down. Rob's eyes desperately scanned the cab of the other truck, trying to pierce the glare of the headlights, to see the face of the driver, to catch a glimpse of Angie. And then he heard it, a scream, faint but unmistakable, carried on the night air. It was his name. Rob! It was Angie's voice, a desperate fading cry from the passenger side of the speeding truck. It was a sound of pure terror, a final, desperate plea that was swallowed by the roar of the engine as the truck sped past him and disappeared into the night. The sight and sound were a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. This was real. It was happening. She was in that truck. A surge of adrenaline and rage coursed through him. He wrenched the steering wheel, turning his own truck around in a reckless, screeching U-turn, the smell of burning rubber filling the air. His mission was no longer one of rescue, but of pursuit. He floored the accelerator, his truck lurching forward, his eyes fixed on the taillights of the green pickup, 2 receding red eyes in the suffocating darkness. The chase was a desperate, adrenaline-fueled blur. Rob pushed his truck to its limits, the engine screaming in protest as he raced through the dark Missouri roads. His world narrowed to the 2 red taillights of the truck ahead. He was fueled by a potent cocktail of fear, rage, and a desperate, all-consuming love for the woman who was just out of his reach. He didn't think about his own safety, about the dangerous speeds, about the winding country roads. All he could think about was Angie. In his mind's eye, he saw her face, her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about their baby. These images were a torment, a constant reminder of everything he stood to lose. He kept his eyes locked on the truck, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He was gaining on them, the distance between the 2 vehicles slowly but steadily shrinking. He could see the back of the truck more clearly now, the distinctive mural of the fish, a grotesque and surreal detail in the midst of this waking nightmare. He was close, so close. He could almost imagine reaching out, of pulling Angie from the clutches of her abductor. But then, disaster. In his frantic pursuit, as he took a sharp turn at high speed, he felt a sickening jolt, heard a loud, grinding noise from the undercarriage of his truck. The transmission. It was gone. The truck lurched, the engine revving uselessly, the vehicle rapidly losing speed. He watched, helpless and horrified, as the taillights of the green pickup grew smaller and smaller, eventually disappearing over a rise in the road, taking with them the love of his life. He was left in the sudden, deafening silence of the Missouri countryside, his truck coasting to a stop on the side of a dark, empty road. The chase was over, and he had lost. The silence that enveloped him was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was a silence filled with the echo of Angie's scream, with the ghost of her voice calling his name. He sat there for a moment, paralyzed by a grief so profound, so all-encompassing, that it felt like a physical weight on his chest. And then the full, crushing weight of his failure crashed down upon him. He had been so close. He had hurt her, and he had been unable to save her. The first call to the Clinton Police Department came in as a frantic, almost incoherent report of an abduction. The dispatcher on duty, accustomed to the slower pace of a small-town police station, was suddenly confronted with a level of raw, unfiltered panic that was rare in their quiet community. The voice on the other end of the line was that of Rob Schaerer, his words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and desperation. He relayed the story of the phone call, the scream, the chase, his voice cracking with an anguish that was palpable even over the phone line. The police response was immediate and swift. Patrol cars were dispatched to the food barn parking lot, their flashing blue and red lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. A stark and jarring intrusion into the quiet residential neighborhood. The scene they found was eerily calm, a silent testament to the violence that had just occurred. Angie's car sat empty in the parking lot, the driver's side door slightly ajar, as if she had left in a hurry. A payphone receiver dangled from its cord, swaying gently in the night breeze, a silent witness to the terrified last words she had spoken. The officers began the methodical, painstaking process of securing the scene. Yellow crime scene tape was unrolled, its bright color a stark and brutal announcement that this was no longer an ordinary parking lot, but the scene of a violent crime. They searched the area for any sign of a struggle, any clue that might point them in the direction of the abductor. They dusted for fingerprints on the payphone, on Angie's car, their movements precise and deliberate in the harsh glare of their flashlights. The first officers to speak with Rob found a young man on the verge of collapse, his face a mask of grief and shock. He recounted the story again, his voice raw with emotion, the details of the green truck, the bearded man, the fish mural, tumbling out of him. The officers listened, their faces grim, the gravity of the situation settling upon them like a physical weight. A bolo be on the lookout was issued for a two-tone green Ford pickup with a distinctive fish mural on the back window. The alert went out to all surrounding counties, to the Missouri State Highway Patrol, a digital net cast into the vast darkness of the American heartland. As the sun began to rise on April 5, 1991, its gentle, golden light illuminating a town that was just beginning to wake up to a new and terrible reality. The investigation into Angie Hammond's disappearance was already in full swing. The Clinton Police Department, a small force accustomed to dealing with minor infractions and local disputes, was now at the center of a major abduction case. The station was a hive of activity, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and the low, urgent hum of voices. Detectives huddled over maps, their faces etched with concentration as they tried to chart the possible escape routes of the green pickup truck. Phone lines were ringing off the hook, with calls coming in from concerned citizens, from the media, from other law enforcement agencies offering their assistance. The search for Angie Hammond was no longer a local affair. It was a statewide effort. The Missouri State Highway Patrol deployed its resources, their troopers scouring the vast network of highways and rural backroads that crisscrossed the state. They checked truck stops and rest areas, their eyes peeled for a vehicle that matched the description Rob had given them. The search was a race against time, every passing hour a victory for the abductor, every tick of the clock a fresh wave of agony for Angie's family and for Rob. The detectives on the case were working on parallel tracks. While the massive search was underway, they were also beginning the painstaking process of building a case. They re-interviewed Rob, going over his story again and again, their questions gentle but probing, their goal to extract every possible detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. They spoke with Angie's family and friends, their hearts aching for these people who were trapped in a state of suspended animation, their lives on hold as they waited for news. They were trying to build a picture of Angie, to understand who she was, who was in her life, to find anyone who might have wanted to harm her. But every lead they pursued, every person they spoke to, led them to the same conclusion. Angie had no enemies. She was a beloved young woman with a bright future, a person who was universally described as kind, caring, and full of life. The randomness of the act was its most terrifying feature. In the days that followed Angie's abduction, the town of Clinton was shrouded in a collective state of shock and grief. The sense of safety and security that had once been the bedrock of their community had been shattered. Now, there was a palpable sense of fear in the air, a feeling of vulnerability that was as unfamiliar as it was unwelcome. Neighbors looked at each other with a new sense of suspicion. Their conversations in the grocery store aisles and on the quiet residential streets, now dominated by hushed, fearful whispers about the missing girl. The search for Angie became a communal effort, a town united in its grief and its desperate hope for her safe return. Volunteers from all walks of life, farmers, teachers, small business owners, came forward, offering their time and their energy to the cause. They organized search parties, their bright orange vests a stark contrast to the muted greens and browns of the Missouri countryside they so diligently scoured. They walked shoulder to shoulder through dense woods and open fields, their eyes scanning the ground for any sign of Angie, any clue that might lead them to her. The sound of their voices calling her name echoed through the quiet landscape, a mournful, hopeful chorus that was carried on the wind. They distributed flyers with Angie's smiling face on them, her image plastered on the windows of every storefront in the historic town square, in every post office and gas station for miles around. Her face became a symbol of their collective loss, a constant, heartbreaking reminder of the young woman who had been stolen from their midst. The local media covered the story relentlessly, their news reports a daily chronicle of the search efforts, their interviews with law enforcement and with Angie's heartbroken family a constant plea to the public for information. The story of the girl from the small Missouri town who had been abducted from a payphone while on the phone with her fiancé captured the attention of the nation. It was a story that tapped into a primal fear, the idea that in a single terrifying moment, a life could be irrevocably altered, a future erased. Days turned into weeks, and the initial frantic energy of the search for Angie Hammond began to give way to a grim, gnawing sense of despair. The organized search parties grew smaller. The media attention began to wane. But for the detectives of the Clinton Police Department, the case remained their highest priority. They were now in the midst of a frustrating and increasingly desperate investigation. They had a detailed description of the suspect and his vehicle, but it was a description that fit thousands of men and thousands of trucks across the country. They had a single traumatized witness in Rob Schaerer, but his heroic, desperate chase had ended in failure, leaving them with no license plate number, no definitive direction of travel. They were adrift in a sea of uncertainty, with no solid leads to guide them. The case file grew thicker with each passing day, a collection of dead-end tips, of sightings of green pickup trucks that turned out to be nothing, of interviews with local residents that yielded no new information. The detectives worked tirelessly, their days a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and long, frustrating hours spent chasing down phantom leads. They re-canvassed the area around the food barn, hoping that a new witness might emerge, someone who had seen something that night but had not yet come forward. They re-interviewed everyone in Angie's life, digging deeper into her relationships, searching for any hint of a secret, of a hidden conflict that might explain what had happened to her. But they found nothing. Her life was an open book, a story of a happy, well-adjusted young woman on the brink of a bright future. The lack of a motive was a significant stumbling block. This didn't appear to be a crime of passion or of revenge. It had all the hallmarks of a random, opportunistic attack, the kind of crime that is the most difficult to solve. The detectives felt as though they were hunting a ghost, a phantom who had materialized out of the darkness on a quiet Thursday night, committed a horrific act, and then vanished without a trace. Weeks turned into months, and the once flickering hope of finding Angie Hammond alive began to dim, replaced by a grim acceptance that they were now likely dealing with a homicide investigation. The case, however, was growing colder by the day. The leads had dried up, the phone had stopped ringing with tips, But the detectives, haunted by the image of the vibrant young woman whose face stared back at them from the flyers still taped to their office walls, refused to give up. They began to look at the case from different angles, to explore theories that they might have initially dismissed. It was during this phase of the investigation that a new and disturbing possibility began to emerge. A theory that would reframe the entire case and suggest that Angie's abduction might not have been a random act of violence after all. The theory was born from a piece of information that came from the shadowy world of police informants. An informant, a person with deep ties to the local criminal underworld, came forward with a story that was both chilling and, in a strange way, logical. The informant claimed that the abduction had been a case of mistaken identity. The intended target, the informant alleged, was not Angie Hammond, but another young woman, the daughter of a police informant who had been providing information to law enforcement about a local drug operation. The theory suggested that the abduction was an act of retaliation, a brutal message sent to the informant to silence him. The details of this new theory were explosive. It suggested a level of organized criminal activity in Clinton that was previously unknown. It also offered a possible explanation for the seemingly random nature of the attack. If the abductor was looking for a specific person, a young woman who may have looked similar to Angie, who may have driven a similar car, who may have frequented the same places, then the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It was a theory that was both compelling and deeply frustrating. It meant that Angie Hammond, a completely innocent young woman with her whole life ahead of her, may have been killed simply because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. A tragic, accidental victim in a war she didn't even know was being fought. The mistaken identity theory, as horrifying as it was, injected a new sense of urgency and purpose into the stalled investigation. The detectives now had a new set of questions to answer, a new path to follow through the tangled wilderness of the case. Who was this other woman, the one who was allegedly the intended target? Who was her father, the police informant? And who were the criminals who were so ruthless, so brazen, that they would resort to kidnapping and murder to protect their interests? The detectives began a new covert phase of their investigation. They had to move carefully to protect the identity of their informant, to avoid tipping off the very people they were now investigating. They began to dig into the local drug scene, to identify the key players, to look for any connections to the abduction. They discovered that there was indeed a significant drug operation in the area, a network of dealers and suppliers who were responsible for a large portion of the crime in the region. And they confirmed that they did have an informant who had been providing them with critical information about this operation. An informant who had a daughter who bore a striking resemblance to Angie Hammond. The pieces were starting to fit, but it was a puzzle with 1,000 moving parts. The detectives now had to try and connect the dots to find a direct link between the drug ring and the man in the green pickup truck. They created a new profile of their suspect. He was no longer just a random predator. He was likely a hired hand, an enforcer, a man with a history of violence. They cross-referenced their list of known associates of the drug ring with their list of potential suspects in Angie's abduction. The work was slow, tedious, and fraught with danger. They were now dealing with a different class of criminal, not the petty thieves and small-time crooks they were used to, but organized, ruthless individuals who would not hesitate to use violence to protect their secrets. The investigation had become a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, a silent war being waged in the shadows of a small Missouri town. Despite the promising new lead, the investigation into the mistaken identity theory ultimately hit a brick wall. The criminal underworld is a closed society, its members bound by a strict code of silence. The detectives were met with a wall of denial, of "I don't know nothing," from everyone they tried to question. They were unable to find the direct evidence they needed to make an arrest, to definitively link a member of the drug ring to the abduction of Angie Hammond. The green pickup truck, the one with the distinctive fish mural, was never found. It was as if the vehicle and the man driving it had simply vanished from the face of the earth. The case once again grew cold, the promising new lead fading into another, frustrating dead end. For the detectives, for Angie's family, and for Rob Schaerer, it was a devastating blow. They had been so close to an answer, so close to understanding the why behind this senseless tragedy. And now they were back where they started, with more questions than answers, with a grief that was compounded by the frustrating lack of closure. The years that followed were a long, slow march of time. Each passing anniversary of Angie's disappearance, a fresh wave of pain. The world moved on, but for those who loved her, time was frozen on that cool spring night in 1991. The case remained open, a cold case, a thick file in a dusty cabinet in the Clinton Police Department, a constant silent reminder of a promise unfulfilled, of a young life cut short. The flyers with Angie's smiling face eventually faded in the sun, were torn down, replaced by new flyers for new community events. But for those who remembered, her image was forever etched in their minds, a symbol of a lost innocence, of a future that was stolen in a moment of brutal, inexplicable violence. Decades have now passed since that terrible night in Clinton, Missouri. The world is a vastly different place. The payphone from which Angie Hammond made her last, terrified call is long gone, a relic of a bygone era. The Food Barn grocery store has changed hands, its familiar sign now just a memory. But the questions that have haunted this small town for more than 30 years remain. What happened to Angela Hammond? Who was the man in the green pickup truck? And will there ever be justice for the vibrant 20-year-old woman and the unborn child she carried, who were stolen from the world on a quiet spring night? The case of Angela Hammond is more than just a cold case. It is a scar on the heart of a community, a wound that has never fully healed. It is a story about the fragility of life, about the terrifying randomness of violence, and about the enduring power of love and loss. For Rob Schaerer, the man who heard his fiancé's last scream, who chased her abductor in a desperate, failed pursuit, the events of that night have been a lifelong burden. His life was irrevocably altered, his future shattered in a matter of terrifying minutes. For Angie's family, the pain of their loss is a constant companion, a grief that does not diminish with the passing of time. They are left with only memories, with photographs of a smiling young woman, with the ghost of a future that was never to be. The Clinton Police Department has never officially closed the case. It remains open, a silent testament to their unwavering commitment to finding answers. New detectives have inherited the case file from their predecessors, their fresh eyes poring over the old reports, the witness statements, the faded photographs, searching for a clue that might have been missed, a connection that was never made. They still receive tips, even after all these years, from people who think they might have seen something, who believe they might have a piece of the puzzle. Each tip is meticulously followed up on, each new lead pursued with a renewed sense of hope, because somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to Angela Hammond. Someone holds the key that could unlock this 30-year-old mystery. And for the town of Clinton, for the family that has never stopped grieving, and for the man who has never forgotten the sound of her voice, calling his name in the darkness, the hope for justice, however faint, remains.